Hello, everybody, and welcome to Mindprint Hash for week 18 of 2026. I'm your host, Cameron Otsuka, alongside Matt Dines. This week, we're going to focus on recent news about the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline, which is now flowing natural gas from Azerbaijan, from Baku. Uh, fun place to go visit for F1. I've been wanting to go for all my F1 heads out there, but it's not flowing natural gas from Azerbaijan all the way into the EU. So I think it serves as a nice little glimpse into some of the political maneuvers, as well as influence campaigns and all of that kind of surrounds these energy corridors and super important control for these pipelines. So Matt, just to get us started here, set the stage. I know there was a recent summit in Armenia that had some interesting European leaders, attendees of note. So just kind of want to get your take first to set the context of, what were people or what were leaders talking about leading into this recent news of the Trans-Adriatic Pipeline.
Okay, so this was a big week in terms of events and developments, mainly in this area of the world that, we're focusing attention on trying to enlighten ourselves and ramp our own understanding up to speed in terms of historical understanding, as well as kind of the restart of these land-based trade routes we talked about, like several episodes now. We've touched on this, the new Silk Roads, all of the Chinese led Belt and Road initiatives, all of that. If you kind of try to wade through the confusion, because this is a messy situation from a geopolitical standpoint. We'll talk about this specific area of the world. It's extremely complicated to cut through, but we saw this week kind of the response from the European side in my kind of framing of how these big picture players will react to each other. And remember, we talk about the big four being the United States, China, Russia, and then continental Europe, or the EU, from the four main spheres of influence. This little section of the world, I mean, you can call it the Middle East, Central Eurasia, Eastern Europe. You just continue to see the kind of the movements as everybody kind of makes their move, hits the clock, turns it over to their opponent, thinking of this as a chess game. They make their move back and forth. You're seeing this thing really start to close in and develop onto something big happening. And we've talked about Bismarck a lot in the last couple of weeks, and he had that kind of infamous line before he passed, and he said, I don't know exactly what will start the next Great War, but I'm pretty sure it'll be some damn foolish thing in the Balkans, and was eerily correct over how World War One came to be. But this whole touch and go situation, we'll talk about the EU and the key events that happened this week. I kind of get the eerie sense that everybody is just pushing and shoving their way from the geopolitical standpoint around the region. They're going to force their opponents at the table, across the table, to react accordingly. And I think the big question is how this all settles out, and it's going to be extremely complicated, I think, to come to a new steady state solution. Best case for all of humanity, it doesn't develop into like the massive kind of Great War type of end game, or close towards the head as it did in prior episodes in history. But if our leaders aren't careful here, that's just what I want to stress. That is the risk that I see. So, yeah, I try to view all of the developments we see going on with U.S. Iran in this kind of wider context about around trade and which powers' interests align and what they need to do for their own best interest, for their own power structures, economies, et cetera, and access to resources, as well as continuing to keep their own debt-based financial system solvent. And I think that's just the story of our time. So this week's developments were very important in my mind on a lot of fronts. So we'll get into that. So to start, there was this EU-Armenia summit held on May 4th and 5th, where we saw, you see the tweet on the left, more than 30 European leaders gathered in Yerevan, along with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. We've talked in the past about where Canada's alignment kind of, as we call it, fits into this big puzzle. And I think his presence here, what's the Canadian PM doing over in Armenia for an EU-Armenia meeting? It tells you, in my opinion, that's just one of the countless tells we've had at this point as far as where Canadian
Where the wind is blowing.
current Canadian political leadership aligns itself. Doesn't mean the run-of-the-mill rank and file Canadian citizen is there, but it tells you exactly kind of how the operatives are influencing Canada and its alignment in my book, and the kind of pushback you see from the Canadian kind of nationalism perspective with the whole elbows out type of movement, kind of setting itself up as a foil once again to the American sovereigntist position as it has in its more ancient history, as opposed to second half of the 20th century history. All right, then you get NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte in Yerevan, and President Zelenskyy of Ukraine. So you see the coalition coming in, and what I view this as is kind of an attempt to bring Armenia, which is a key location. You've got basically conflict. It's been present in the Caucasus and developing for decades now, but it's really pushing this action is pushing the situation towards more instability, in my opinion, not less. And we saw, starting last August in a White House kind of signing ceremony of a treaty between, two neighboring countries. Actually, just one of the few examples in the world of countries that are, what, I don't know the proper term for it, I forget, but you split them. You got Armenia in the middle, and then two pockets of Azerbaijan, and then tons of little acreages, square miles, whatever, that are under contest between who holds sovereignty over them. This is just old school, border clashes type of disagreements that spring up between neighbors throughout history as we shift over from peacetime into wartime. And there is no, in my opinion, this time is different. We never permanently solve these things, but what we can do, or what is in the control of the leaders in our times, is how we navigate it and push it towards certain outcomes. So my concern here, when I see this action taken, there is going to be an equal and opposite response in reaction to that from the other players at the table, and we're going to start to see those show up in the coming weeks and months. So every action has consequences, or as we put it in the terms on social media these days, a little bit more crass, FAFO. I won't spell that one out. The other key thing I wanted to highlight here, Cameron, before we go in, the chart on European expansion. We'll talk about this in a little bit more detail. If you recall back in January, I can't remember, Cameron, if we brought this one up as a topic, but Bulgaria adopted the euro officially in January, so it flipped on and you could say gave up its sovereignty over its own local currency.
Monetary sovereignty, at least. Yeah.
Monetary sovereignty, correct. Adopted the euro, and that brings it in kind of the complete package of Eurozone participation as a member state, Schengen member, all that stuff. Now you're on the euro itself. So that'll become kind of important as we talk about some of the repercussions of these oil and gas pipelines that are setting out, which echoes, one of our favorite books we'll always bring up, with a lot of frequency if you listen to us, The Prize by Daniel Yergin, talking about geopolitics as a competition for access to resources, is what this amounts to at the end of the day. So speaking of that access to resources, here's the photo op. You've got Ursula von der Leyen on the left, former, was it Prime Minister or President of Portugal, Costa in the middle. I think he's EU president currently. Then Pashinyan, I don't even know if I'm saying that correctly, but he was the very pro-European figure, representing the current Armenian government at these at this summit, which ended in a lot of handshakes, connectivity partnerships, etc., to bring Armenia more into the EU economic sphere of influence. So to bring that up, just the reaction here. We'll talk about these pipelines that are coming into being. But since January this year, we've had the pipeline set up. We'll show you the image in a second, which is basically moving oil and gas, like energy resources that kind of we all have the awareness. Europe is short access to energy, and if you zoom out, like a lot of the geopolitical activity over the last 10 years, right? We see pipelines being blown up, stuff like that. It's really, under the hood, or at least a large component of this is the access to energy resources. And at the end of the day, it's which producer, from the supply standpoint, is going to have access to specific demand markets, and those relationships, every one of those linkages are things of extreme value, right? If you're a supplier, you will fight for access to sell your commodities into a demand market. This is what the prize by Daniel Yergin really gets at. When all these diplomats, politicians, NATO generals, et cetera, get together at these summits, a big piece of what's on the table here, and the actual thing they're going after is that prize. It's what are those energy supply-demand relationships going to look like for the, decades type of timelines into the future. So it's a very big deal. We've never figured out a way to fully resolve them peacefully in the the oil era, post mid 1800s. All right, so now you get into some reactions. I want to focus on this in response to those handshake photo ops coming out of the EU-Armenia summit, and we've got on the left Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Austria. I think they in this kind of thinking or analysis, they really represent a good picture of where the demand side is coming from and their interests, and then the same Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Russia and what the supplier has to say about what they just saw take place. So on the left, you very much see pats on the back, just kind of celebration mode from Austria. Basically, showing happiness of this new pipeline deal. And just for context, these pipelines aren't like filling a massive total share of, say, Germany and Austria's energy demands as they stand today, right? Since oil's largely been flowing through the pipelines we're showing you. Well, we'll show you on the screen the map in a second. It's still single digits percentage, but direction of travel is what's important, or rate of change, right? What's the first derivative on these trends doing? And that'll tell you what each side thinks about it. Notably, you see, the first tweet from MFA Austria, you see the highlight of the commitment to fighting FIMI. I think it's foreign interference and misinformation. I didn't get that acronym perfectly correct, but that's pretty much what it's over. It's this digital kind of what would you call it? Just fight that takes place on modern social media platforms
Tough
in
for
the
most
information
viewers
space.
and anybody to understand. Am I seeing something from a bot? Is this actually a
Yeah,
real person? That's what they're trying to relate this to, right? Yeah.
yeah. And that's why we try to be careful from a week to week on which tweets we'll show you or which news sources we'll put up on the screen. Everybody's got their own you know objectivity or lack thereof on describing this process, especially when all the marbles are at stake. But when we can, we want to go direct to the source as opposed to, I don't know, just screenshotting just a guy with a few
Somebody's
million
take.
followers
Yeah.
getting the most views, right? Because everybody at the end of the day, you never know how they're influenced or which which specific perspective they may be, applying some spin on the ball. And There's a professional tennis. There's a lot of spin on the ball out there, as we all kind of know intuitively. All right. But yeah, you see the MFA Australia saying we support the agreement as you would expect them to. And also just kind of foot to, if you've been following us the last few weeks, we talked about Prussia, Austria, kind of the power flip flop that happened in 1864 to 1866. Austria used to be, very close to top of the three on the like continental powers. They've fallen down the leaderboard, and you kind of see them here. They're just kind of taking what the E3 as they're called, UK, France, Germany, give them in my read of this situation. All right. So they're just largely going along with the main Northern European powers, as well as the center of gravity in European politics, which is Brussels. Right. All right. On the right, you've got the MFA of Russia, and you see this one as saying like, oh, it's kind of like, watch out. Do you guys know what you just did? And obviously they do, but you see their diplomat Zakharova say Armenia, a country that they've always regarded as fraternal, has become a platform for the Kiev regime, which, as you know, is something we're all deeply familiar with at this point. Moscow and Kiev do not see eye to eye, and Kiev being historically that border land between continental Europe and Russia. You see this iteration of power in Ukraine really aligning itself with the EU and the UK. All right. And this is foreboding and where things get concerning. He says at the same time, Zelensky's visit to Yerevan showed Armenians what kind of future the EU has in store for them. Just oof. Obviously, the Ukraine war is a highly controversial, emotional situation. On top of being kind of a humanitarian disaster, as we all know, this thing has turned from a political um, or a situation that was being contested at the political level, right? And it's turned into military, which means a lot of people have lost their lives. And it's very sad. And for this to be hinting at some future of escalation of violence in the Caucasus, which we'll show on the map in a second, that is something. If you're one of these diplomats and involved at the table here, I would hope they'd be trying to avoid that, but as history shows, that's not always going to be the case. So let's stay hopeful that there's no further escalation of war breaking out any further than it already is. But I would say at this point the tea leaves are showing up, and it's not positive developments, in my opinion, from what we saw everybody doing this week. All right. So this pipeline that we've been hinting at, the key thing, Cameron, we added some flags here to show EU countries, as well as which ones are on the euro. We'll talk about the integrations here of currency, right? Matching, if you think about the actual goods here, the energy resources traveling from east to west, from the supply market into kind of Eastern Europe and Germany, you see kind of a trend of EU expansion from the membership perspective over time. Obviously Germany, Austria, Czech Republic, Hungary, going back decades to the kind of the origination of the union itself. But in kind of recent developments, you've seen things like Romania, Bulgaria adding on, and then this year, as I said, you saw that expansion of the monetary, sovereignty shifting from nation states towards that big bureaucratic body, that we call the Brussels and Frankfurt kind of center of gravity in Europe. So I think what you're looking at here, if you think about the Russia-Ukraine situation as reflective of largely kind of economic interests, European access to resources for its own economic growth, solvency of its own credit-based financial system, all of that. Pushing further, and I mean Turkey is also a big player on this map, right? I think they've had their EU member application open since, I don't know, it goes back pretty far. It's at least 2005.
Yeah.
It's been on hold for that entire time. That entire time, I mean, like a couple of decades now, as this situation is working towards some big historical resolution. We'll see how this plays out. But then you've got the pipelines over into Baku, which has been, heavily oil producing since the early 1900s, and then over, into Iran. And we all know what's happening in Iran lately with a military kinetic situation that's, on pause now and looking for some sort of diplomatic agreement here to achieve some new steady state. We'll talk about that at the end. And then Armenia would be in the middle here, but between Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, Iran, and it just kind of shows me the importance from the EU's perspective, the access to energy resources, pushing forward the integration of these supply chains up the through Anatolia, or from the Caucasus through Anatolia up through the Balkans and Central Europe. All of these crazy political developments, the complicated alignments. At the end of the day, it's largely driven by the access to resources, and then the financial layer, the political layer. Those will kind of respond to that battle taking place. All right. And then last, the Trans-Caspian Pipeline here. This is the big kahuna development. This would actually link through this terminal, those pipelines we just described, to like across the Caspian Sea into Turkmenistan, which at some point you're getting further and further away from Europe, right? And you're integrating all of these, we call like these are new Silk Roads at the end of the day. It's part of the revival of land-based trade routes in the 21st century that we're seeing taking place for the first time in really 500 years. But this new terminal is just pushing further these the full integration from the supply markets that just keep going further and further east towards the ultimate consumption center at the far or last stops in the hub that really start to hit for deeper and deeper west onto the European peninsula. So that's what's going on here. The like it will create conflict. I mean, we've seen military conflict in the Caucasus, region. Um, there's a lot of effort from the White House, this administration, to try to establish peace in this little isthmus that's been termed the International North-South Trade Corridor. Um, but I think it's the ideal kind of setup here would be everyone, I don't know, doing what they can to play nice with each other from the four main regional sphere of influence powers perspective, as opposed to, any one of those, instead of cooperating with each other or figuring out some sort of steady state solution, um, unilaterally taking action, right? Or broadly their power block taking action to insert themselves in here. It's only going to make this situation worse, or increase the probability of a worse military situation, bigger military situation developing than we're already at with this Ukraine-Russia conflict opening up, the Iran military actions opening up, Israel and its neighbors conflict actually opening up, Azerbaijan and Armenia opening up and being put back under wraps, but risking, opening back up over something like this. It's dangerous times, and this is where we actually need, if we want to see peace, you actually would need competent diplomatic and political leadership here guiding the process, and I hope our leaders are up to it. Sometimes I question whether they are, but I guess history will reveal itself. All right. So some things going on recently that might not have been on all of our radar. So Bulgaria, we talked about them just onboarding the euro as of January at elections, and what would be probably broadly described as the candidate who more aligned towards Russia, or at least that's how it's presented, rather than EU, prevailed in what was pretty much a landslide election victory, a result. So this will play in to the upcoming development. Yeah, pro-Russian, according to Reuters, London-based newswire, and I'd say that's probably accurate. He would lean more that direction, but I'm not like totally an expert on everybody and
all the
the
political leanings.
the alignment in this whole region, because I'll just lay it out at the end how big of a mess it actually is. You've got so many relationships between neighbors that don't get along, and then there's just a lot of interrelationships between neighbors of neighbors that
Yeah.
the enemy of my enemy is my friend type of setup. And once you just wrap your head around all of this, you're like, what is going like this is a total mess.
PhD theses are written on, on
it is
individual
it is
pieces,
very complicated, and it's hard to see, even the wise Solomon being able to come up with the perfect solution here. All right, that's for hopefully us to figure out as time goes on without having to resort to catastrophic violence. All right. So you saw that changeover in political representation in Bulgaria. Interesting. It's like, so if you think about EU inserting itself into Armenia, which has its own elections coming up in June, right? Just right around the corner, a month from now. So they're making a big push. They just lost ground in Bulgaria, and then also they just lost a lot of ground in Romania as well, as their pro-European government collapsed. And then, a side article here on the currency front. So at the end of the day, Mind Print Hash, we want to focus on this on the financial evolution and how the geopolitics is really going to respond to the transitions and developments and how or what societies do at the monetary layer is what we're looking for signal, right? And May 5th, in conjunction with this same story that the standing government did not survive a no confidence vote. So there will be elections there as well. Um, the political crisis is again testing the country's managed float currency regime. So you've got the Romanian leu, LEU, doesn't show up on anybody's radar globally as a currency. It's really yeah, it's a local currency, right? Um, the central bank allowed the leu to weaken to record lows this week. When we say record lows, I got the chart. This is our financial chart this week. The euro Romanian leu cross exchange rate. You got kind of an interesting development here since 2008. It's been broadly what's been happening as we're going from one global economic growth engine model to the next thing. And the way I kind of picture this is your post World War I to 2008 global trade setup, which was largely based on, hey, American Navy is going to protect the high seas. Everybody will reserve and settle in the dollar. And then with those safe high seas, manufacturing, exports can float on ships, vessels, etc., and move those goods from their production sources of supply country, centers of demand, and we're just going to crank that up, dial it up to as far as it can go. Well, that whole order, like it showed like it broke at the seams, like it was on its last leg in 2008. For the last 18 years now, we've been in this lull period. It's not 18 years, actually. I'd say it's the next thing started with COVID, right, in 2020. But let's say for that intermediate period between 2008 and 2020, we were just kind of biding time and consolidation, figuring out what was next. And now we're moving to the next thing, right? The next model, which we're seeing emerge in real time. And that's where we'll talk about things like Pax Silica or the land-based New Silk Road trade routes, all of that. But my point is the policy, we want to talk specifically about Romania here, which I'm no expert on at all, but I'll look at the chart and see what's look for the financial chart to inform our perspective on what's going on here. We know there's been efforts to integrate Romania into the European orbit, right? The EU economic zone, political zone, currency zone, all of that. And then that will collide at its head with the Russian sphere of influence. And this is just something that happens, every 100 years, really, in European history. Napoleon, and then you had the two world wars, and we're seeing it today. Like it's happening with the Ukraine war, and then it's happening, sadly, with what's developing, potentially escalating over into the Caucasus region. But my point is, during this lull, what you saw from the Romanian central banking policy and approach to managing their currency, basically, like they didn't adopt the euro. They've got to meet these criteria to onboard in if they have the support of their people, in the democratic process to go one way versus the other. And it's a tug of war, right? You've got certain political regimes or representation that'll lean more European, and then the population will sway the other direction. This is the messy process of these things settling out. But from the currency standpoint, you've seen an approach where the local central bankers have allowed this process to manage itself through a bend but don't break, FX currency weakening. And that's where you see this upward trend over time, right? As what's happened was a growth model that might have worked pre-2008, which was heavily dependent on European foreign direct investment capital inflows into Romania. You had growth-driven by consumption increases to bump up GDP. That kind of stalled out in this kind of 10-year decade interregnum after 2008. And what it started to shift towards is more of a fixed investment, building up infrastructure, that type of thing, economic focus, and kind of the safety valve to keeping that process going. And on the other side of that, the capital account. They're in a situation, Romania, where they've got a habit of having positive capital account surpluses, which means, hey, more foreign capital coming in to fund growth. And then you've historically seen trade account deficits, right? So it's just like borrowing to fund, let's say, consumption, right? In the old world model, but those trade deficits have persisted as the Romanian economy typically consumes externally more than it gives back and exports to those same trade partners. All right, so it's kind of a situation that reminds me a lot of the U.S. here, but just on a much smaller level. And you kind of see hallmarks of that same kind of policy approach for the next era, the focus on, say, reindustrializing or, wanting that type of economic growth, as opposed to, hey, we're just going to consume our way towards prosperity, which can only work for so long by definition. So I think one of the key things we've seen in the last week or since this Iran situation was, let out of the bag since the coordinated operation by Israel and the United States on February 28th. You've seen the volatility in the euro, Romanian leu cross exchange rate. It's broken through 5, and that's been the case since the second half of 2025. But all of the kind of the natural resources demand issues or supply chain issues coming out of the Persian Gulf, you see it start to hit these periphery economies the hardest. So if you look at inflation here, those type of effects, that's having an impact as well here. So you're seeing over the long term, the trend is currency weakening of the local currency versus like a major global currency like the euro. It's not the major global currency, not even close in my opinion. But you see on a relative basis, you see the weakening of this periphery country, Romania. So what I'm illustrating here is the tug of war that's being felt by the countries in the middle, and they're just being pulled apart and stressed and stretched and forced to deal with the majority of kind of the effects of the kind of that battle taking place between the heavyweights, like say the EU or Russia on the other end.
Yeah.
So that's that. Like these countries, and we can see it in the news, right? It's noticeable at this point. Don't want to talk deeply on this one, but Hungary with its recent elections, you saw the exit of Orban and the onboarding of new leadership with Magyar, I think is how you pronounce the name. But you see kind of a shift, a change in direction from the prior stance of the Orban kind of regime that's been in place for decades. So this will have big repercussions, but really what we're getting across, you see the changing tides across all the EU countries. Cameron, we did have a slide up right about Bulgaria. Did we go through that one?
Did,
yeah. We talked about
I
those.
just wanted to
Romania,
highlight here,
Bulgaria. Yeah.
Bulgaria, Romania, Hungary, right? Those are those 3 countries that we just talked about having major regime shifts in the last month. So if you're just watching the map, you're just kind of seeing the countries along the way get influenced one way or the other.
Yeah. And then notice, I think the last call out, who was not there at that EU-Armenia summit? At the United States, right? They don't read too much into their words, but sometimes silence speaks louder than words, right?
Yeah.
And I I don't think, like, if you view the situation, this isn't the US's backyard, right? We don't really have economic interests here. If anything, like, the US is just, its interest is to play a role and make sure um, this whole thing doesn't get too out of hand, or at least that's how I read it. Now, individual stakeholders, business, like private business interests, they may want to influence the U.S. government towards their own um, book of business and those types of alignments. But I think, broadly speaking, from the U.S. interest perspective, this is not our backyard. Our goal here, in my opinion, uh, would, should, whatever. Those are interesting words to place. Kind of my own feelings on the topic on, but I think from the U.S. perspective, like, at the best case, our interest should be just prohibit the complete mess of the situation from devolving into, like, all out military escalation. And if you just think about the setups here, you've got so many, strange adversarial relationships at play. Greece doesn't get along with Turkey. They're fighting over contests of islands in the Mediterranean that have been under contest. They've been fighting over them for the entire civilizational history of their people. Same thing with ethnic clashes in the Caucasus, the Central Europe, the Balkans, well known ethnic tensions between certain groups. Iran is now involved in this. You see some of the pipelines traversing through certain territories. It's complicated, right? And I don't know what a perfect solution looks like. I just hope we are capable of finding one without I don't know what's the word for this, Cameron.
I
The
mean, frankly,
doomsday
just without World
scenario.
War
Yeah.
III. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
yeah, that's exactly. Yeah, yeah. Let's not go there. But it's hard. It's a very tough task. It'll take competence to get it done, and a lot of capable maneuvering. All right. So let's close this out. I think one of the most interesting things we saw this week was actually on the U.S.-Iran situation, and this is really for the first time um, in the post February, or since the February 28th attacks opened up. We saw the ceasefire on April 7th, and the attempt to turn this into to move this from a military kind of scope of operations into political diplomacy, um, uh, type of phase for negotiations. Obviously, there's been attempts, and I'll start with this Monday, to prevent that from happening. So, number one, we woke up Monday morning and, you know, first market headlines when all of us financial professionals logged in and began trading was IRGC attacks UAE's energy export facilities at Fujairah, or the export, port of Fujairah. And we saw the bond market attack where U.S. Treasury yields breached the 5% level for the first time since, I don't know. I'd have to go through and look at it, but it was the first time we'd hit that resistance in a couple of years. Um, Same thing. You got long end rates across pretty much all world bond markets showing that same stress. Notably, if you want to see a chart that looks like it's in pain, go look at the 30-year UK gilt, and that'll tell you, yeah, who's close to the point of tapping out or calling emergency. All right. So you saw that, and the way I read that, so you have the U.S. and Iran closing in on an agreement that will, bring some closure to this phase, so we can move on to some sort of settlement where both sides work towards some end result that both of them can agree with. And I'd say so. I think it's a 14-point MOU fits on one page. The way I would understand it, right? If you think about the old, framework that was negotiated by the Obama White House back in 2015, but also with the E3 powers, so France, UK, Germany, the JCPOA, that was all like everything is front loaded as far as the agreement. You do it, you comply. And what you're actually kind of getting at is you're trying to get two sides who absolutely mistrust each other to come to some agreement. And it's got to be like, you're married right now, shotgun wedding, got to agree to it. And it's very hard to get an optimal deal and something both sides or will stand up to what both sides want, I think, in that type of process versus this one currently. And keep in mind, I think the E3 were standing behind the JCPOA. I think it was still technically in effect. And yet now we know IRGC was enriching uranium up to 60%. So I'm not, a stickler for researching the letter of the agreement, but I'm pretty sure that that would have been in violation. But who knows? Like when you're just on the cusp of, you've passed all the hard work to get a nuclear weapon, to push it that far. I'm going to say that was probably outside of the bounds of the original JCPOA, but we'll leave that for the sticklers to decide. All right. Anyway, this new kind of framework that's being set up with the MOU that's on the table as of Wednesday, and markets reacted positively to. It's a 14-point plan, fits on one page. And instead of asking both sides who distrust each other to come in and just, hey, we're going to go from 0 to 1 overnight, sign on the dotted line. It's structured as a phased process where say, hey, you have 30 days here to start doing this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. And it's just an agreement that, hey, we're going to build on this in a series of steps over an elongated period of time, so that, trust, instead of going from none to full and asking to go in one big cliff up, which is really hard to do. It's built on like a series of small steps and ultimately, working towards getting to that end game. And I think if we're talking about this big regional mess, right, that extends beyond Iran, as kind of we're illustrating with everything we talked about before, that seems like an approach that can work if everybody can be, and instead of pushing each other further and taking actions that aggravate competing interests and only at the end of the day further us along on that process of walking up to that line of full brinksmanship and war that usually doesn't end well. Taking this process on a step that has like little steps by steps, and then we get to that resolution we want, and we don't have to resort to broader war, full fifth generation warfare, all of that. It seems like a much more ideal outcome in my point of view, but I don't know, call me biased, right? All right. So this week in Iran, you saw that development towards a peace process, and then we saw some camps were trying to sabotage it. I think the thing I found most interesting was this was really the first time that China put its thumb on the scales, pushing the IRGC towards what I just described as the outcome, the build trust outcome that hopefully ends in a durable and lasting peace, right? And so if you think about this from the standpoint of these old Silk Roads, think about both of these actions, what we saw from the EU going into Armenia, and then China influencing the US-Iran negotiations and progress. Think about that as the two endpoints of the new Silk Road trade routes, spanning from East Asia all the way to the west end of the European peninsula. The way I view this, you've got both sides now, uh, with their political weight, economic weight, pushing for influence over that process, over the trade routes. And if you think about land-based trade, um, you have to, like, your goods are going to be marked up at every kind of political endpoint, every checkpoint, on every toll booth, on the mile marker. So the more you bring in each of those into your orbit and align their economic interests or align them into your currency system, whether it's the euro or the Chinese yuan or renminbi, that's going to influence in the big picture end game once the trade is, just growing and ramping up over the course of the 21st century, through these new corridors. It's gonna tell you who captures more of the value, on that land-based trade franchise. So that's what's at stake here. So China, both inserting itself into the process with the IRGC, saying, "Guys, cool it." Like, talk about the attack on Fujairah, all of that. They're basically telling them, knock it off, politely. And then also you saw another step where, um, uh, Chinese financial regulators gave a verbal directive to its banks not to, extend loans to specific, Chinese refineries that were known to be purchasing sanctioned Iranian oil, right? And kind of this just goes to show, when we say a name like Iran, right? It's not a monolith. There's different political factions vying for, control of, at the governance layer itself, or you could say the economic layer or the financial system, all of that. There's different power factions in a country like Iran, which, we highlight with the differentiation between the civilian government or civilian military and the IRGC per se. But you see the same thing showing up in, China, and this little bit I highlighted here at the bottom of the Bloomberg article. Um, the the directive to stop new loans or pause new loans to this U.S. sanctioned refiner, uh, contrasts with a notice put out like 4 days earlier on May 2nd from China's Ministry of Commerce, which instructed companies to disregard the U.S. sanctions. So you're told by two separate bodies within China itself two different things. And it just goes to show, like, in each of these countries themselves, or nation states, or just kind of broader spheres, internal, competition and power struggles going on as well. But point is, from this one, we saw kind of, some power faction in China was able, or felt it, the risk was, low enough or mitigated to poke their heads up and, push this action through, and instruct, really what it's doing is saying, hey, it is amounting to the same, it's the winds are blowing in the same direction as, say, the U.S. blockade of, Iranian oil, tankers, exporting oil onto the global markets. So they're working in, this is, I would say, cooperatively with the U.S. Treasury and Department of War's, approach, as we're in this post-military phase of resolving the Iran quagmire that we've been in for, like, our entire lifetimes, essentially, right? Okay. And so you're starting to see some interesting other developments as well. Okay, so, before I'll get there, China presses Iran against resuming war. All right, so they're saying knock it off. That's what I, was just saying. This is a CNBC article. And also, went on record urging, the Hormuz reopening ahead of this, Trump-Xi summit, which is, a couple of weeks around the corner. The large aircrafts were already landing with the supplies, all of that, to prepare, all the things necessary for this, for this state contingency to arrive and hold the U.S. China summit here in the next couple of weeks. All right, and then the last one. This is within the last hour. Well, someone said they saw those warnings, not just from the U.S. but also coming from China and in the Hormuz, and blatantly, like I guess I think of a right term here, Karen, but like spit in the face of exactly that. A Chinese oil tanker was attacked in the Strait of Hormuz, which is like, this is no accident. You did this on purpose at this point. So there's going to be repercussions. This is escalatory. Um, I'm hopeful that kind of peace process or some sort of negotiation um, can come to a successful conclusion. But at this point, even when a mega power like China has become puts their thumb on the scale and weighs in on the process, and you still say no, um, you know, sometimes that's just dumb. It's like a dog biting its master's hand, and if you do that enough, well, don't be surprised if you have to be put down. So I don't know. It's pretty dark where that went, but these it was a huge week of developments, kind of filling in the bigger picture that kind of we try to put together, understanding all these crazy headlines going on Mindprint Hash through the context of number one, the monetary infrastructure and the changes we're living through, but then history coming in as a guide. And then if you think about it, like this is, if you think about, you narrow in on this specific part of the world, everything from, the Eastern Europe, that intersection between continental Europe and Russia, down through Ukraine, all the way through the Caucasus. It's in Afghanistan now. It's in Iran. It's in Israel. It's in Syria. This is just a giant mess. It's gonna be the story of the next 5 to 10 years. I think how collectively these four regional powers can work together or not to ultimately resolve this. But in some way, shape, or form, it will eventually resolve. But that's what's going on. Right now, the outcome is unknown, but yeah, we'll continue to monitor the situation.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a perfect spot to end today's episode. So thank you everybody for watching as always. If you have not already, please subscribe to Mindprint Hash on Substack, YouTube. We're also on X, LinkedIn. You can find Matt at Levered USTs. I'm at Cameron Otsuka. Thank you all, and see you all next week.